US President Donald Trump has declared a complete and absolute victory in the war against Iran after an agreement on a 2-week ceasefire. Iran said the same thing, adding that they managed to completely defeat the US and force Donald Trump to back down and accept all 10 points of their peace plan. But if we sum up the interim results, we can confidently say that, situationally, the winners of this phase of the war are Iran, Israel, and, unexpectedly, Oman. But the US and the Persian Gulf countries have objectively suffered a tactical defeat. But let me note right away, we're not talking about a final victory or a final defeat. This is just an intermediate stage. Since there are no guarantees that the war won't resume in 2 weeks, since all sides are taking absolutely maximalist positions, which will make it very difficult to reach a full peace agreement to completely end the war in the region. So let's sum up the interim results of this war in the Middle East, without embellishment, without loud statements, just the facts about what's happening and how it all ended. Who, I emphasize, at this stage of the war can call themselves the winner, and who is actually the loser, and who has really gained advantages from this phase of the war, and who has suffered losses? My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to support the work of this channel financially with your donation or a paid membership. You can do this via the links and details in the description of this video or by using the QR code on your screens. Let's sort this out from the start and put things in order, since those who brag most about victories often didn't actually win them, and vice versa. Let's look at the facts. Well, the first fact, Trump has declared victory in the war, a complete and final victory, 100%. This is a quote from Trump about the war in the Middle East, and he went on to note that the issue of Iranian enriched uranium would be perfectly resolved, otherwise there would have been no truce. At the same time, Trump did not specify whether he would return to threats of striking Iran's infrastructure if the deal falls through, and he said that you will have to wait and see. We've heard this somewhere before. In addition, he allowed for the possibility that China might have played a role in convincing Iran to agree to a 2-week truce. Well, I think this is Trump trying to cushion things before his trip to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. Iran also declared, of course, victory. Iran also announced that they definitely won, and stated that they managed to force Trump to accept the Iranian 10-point peace plan and back down. Essentially, Iran is now mocking the American president because in part they are right. Trump accepted exactly the Iranian proposal as the basis for further negotiations. Nevertheless, these are loud statements, but in fact we have the following. Trump announced the suspension of bombings in Iran and a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Iran supposedly agreed in response to open the Hormuz Strait, but there's a nuance that I'll mention later. And this nuance clearly counts as another win for Iran and Oman unexpectedly. Oman had good reason to side with Tehran at the war's most crucial moment. The head of Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi, confirmed their readiness to stop the strikes if the strikes on Iran also stop. Here, we have to give credit to Pakistan and its mediation efforts, because this is purely their achievement. They, worked like horses until the very last minute. And Iran agreed to ensure free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, but with technical restrictions. There's your nuance. As of now, at the time of recording this episode, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and if we look at the marine traffic monitoring data, we'll see that there isn't any significant ship passage happening. According to CNN, currently only 5% of the pre-war traffic is passing through the strait, and even that is mostly ships from India and Pakistan, who in fact had previously made separate agreements with Iran about passage. Whether the Strait of Hormuz will be fully opened is still an open question, but it's already somewhat predetermined. There's an interesting point here. Iran wants to charge $2 million for the passage of each vessel, and this demand hasn't gone anywhere. Iran considers this fee as reparations for the damage caused during the war. In other words, it's not Trump who will pay for the damage, but the ship owners. The issue of the Hormuz Strait, among other things, will be addressed at the first direct talks on Friday, April 10 in Islamabad. The American delegation will be led by J.D. Vance. Iran will be represented by Speaker of Parliament Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. By the way, regarding J.D. Vance, I was right. Yesterday he spoke in Budapest in support of Viktor Orban. But he didn't fly to the region for that. He went there to be on time for the negotiations, and it's known that last night he actively participated in those negotiations. And Trump says that Iran has presented a plan that can be worked with, which was published in the Iranian media the day before. It's a 10-point plan, and Trump says that Iran is not backing down from its maximalist demands, but there is something to talk about. What is Iran demanding? Well, in short, Iran is demanding the continuation of uranium enrichment, the withdrawal of the U.S. from its military bases throughout the Middle East. There is a demand for the complete end of U.S. military presence in the region, control over the Hormuz Strait, an end to strikes against Iran and, importantly, its proxy forces, a UN Security Council resolution to legitimize the peace deal, the complete lifting of all sanctions, and the unfreezing of frozen assets. Well, I don't know exactly how Trump is going to meet all these demands or how he can claim that they've supposedly reached an agreement on uranium. Iran is saying directly, no, we want to continue enriching it. At least the first three Iranian demands are clearly impossible to fulfill. And the US demands are still the same. 15 points that were published back on March 24. Exactly the same kind of obviously unattainable maximalist demands. In the end, I don't know how they plan to reach a full agreement within these 2 weeks. Abbas Araghchi, in his statement, which is important, mentioned both plans. Both the American 15 points and the Iranian 10. If the negotiations in Islamabad are successful, then perhaps the sides will meet, as they say, somewhere in the middle. And then that would be the best scenario for everyone, considering how events have unfolded. In any case, a détente, even if it's temporary, is a good thing. The markets reacted immediately. Oil dropped from $110 to $92 per barrel. Gas prices also eased a bit. It was 570 euros per 1,000 cubic meters. Now it's 450. We're now waiting for the April 10th negotiations. Well, now let's move on to the analysis. Let's immediately clarify that the terms of the truce are not exactly known to us. There are two versions, one from each side. In other words, we are dealing with a truce, not a final settlement of the war. However, this was to be expected considering that neither side considers itself defeated. Therefore, the problem of Iran remains unresolved, even after more than a month of intense fighting. But the mediators have changed. Instead of Qatar and Oman, who became targets of missile strikes in this war and ended up on different sides, since Oman essentially switched to Iran's side, now the peacemakers are Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. We also have two conflicting statements regarding the ceasefire. Washington, through Donald Trump, stated that his country, quote, has more than fulfilled all its military objectives in Iran and that now a long-term peace agreement will be signed in the Middle East. Trump also added that Iran agreed to a ceasefire on the condition of immediately opening the Hormuz Strait to absolutely all ships. As we discussed, this has not been fulfilled yet. In addition, Trump stated that the 10 points from Iran received the day before could serve as a working basis for negotiations. This is where the Iranians say that Trump gave in. On the other hand, Iran's Supreme National Security Council published a statement claiming that the US agreed to all of Iran's demands and that the 10 points from Iran will be the basis for negotiations. Iranian media also widely reported on the defeat of the US and Israel in this war and Iran's continued control over the Strait of Hormuz. It's hard to imagine that the US agreed to all of these points put forward by Iran. These are the very points over which the war started just over a month ago. Thus, it's also hard to imagine that the Iranians completely capitulated to the United States of America and agreed to their equally maximalist demands. And judging by the wave of criticism that fell on Trump from the hawks in the US, from the Democrats, and from some Israeli officials, they don't like the terms of the truce, which means there are no mutual concessions there, and in fact the US doesn't get anything right away. But still, we can sum up the interim results of this almost 40-day war by the US and Israel against Iran, and try to answer who at this stage is the winner for now and who is the loser for now. Let me immediately point out that the tactical victory in this war was achieved by Israel, Iran, and Oman. I'll explain now. Israel managed to achieve some military objectives and seriously weaken the Iranians, which would have been impossible without cover from the US and their direct involvement in the hostilities. So, Israel actually accomplished some of its military objectives. That should be acknowledged. Yes, there is a problem in that they failed to defeat Hezbollah. Yes, there is a problem that Iran still retains some capabilities, but nevertheless, if the US had not gotten involved in the war, Israel would not have been able to weaken Iran this much right now. The Iranians endured a tough confrontation with a superior opponent, demonstrated their ability to withstand attacks throughout the war, and also took control of the Hormuz Strait, with the ambition to become, a kind of power broker. The power broker for the entire Persian Gulf. So what did Oman achieve? In the first days, Oman itself was under attack, and then, as you remember, Omani officials suddenly switched to Iran's side and declared that negotiations were needed, that dialogue was necessary, that the Americans were wrong, and that bombing was unacceptable. Remember that rumor about Trump supposedly demanding $5 trillion from the Gulf monarchies to continue the war and so on? All of that was started by Oman. Why would Oman do that? Yes, the thing is that now Iran is proposing that all the money collected for ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz should actually be divided between the two sides, Oman and Iran, because they control the Strait of Hormuz from both shores, essentially. That's why Oman also benefits. The results for the United States of America are mixed. On one hand, from a military point of view, the US has weakened Iran just like Israel has, although the stated objectives of the operation were different. On the other hand, in terms of reputation, this war will be a very serious long-term blow for them. Moreover, the political goals of the war were not achieved. Billions of dollars were spent on a month of bombings without any absolutely clear results. Plus, there is now a shortage of various types of weapons, the replenishment of which will take years. And now Americans will ask, what was all this for? Well, what was the outcome of this whole war? Just the losses suffered, nothing more. Who else lost? The Arabian monarchies of the Persian Gulf lost. They lost too. Why? First of all, their traditional concept of national security collapsed, which was based on faith in the American security umbrella. Unfortunately, now all these monarchies realize that the Americans can't fully protect them. Secondly, they have become the main punching bag in this whole war, and their investment climate will suffer greatly from the consequences of this war. Even if they manage to agree on a long-term peace now, well, it's unlikely that anyone will be investing as actively in Dubai now. That real estate in Dubai, after all, people were buying it up. Now it's become obvious that Dubai is not protected. It can come under attack. People will invest less money there. Thirdly, if Iran maintains control over the Hormuz Strait, all their oil and gas exports will depend on the goodwill of Tehran. And that's worse. It's the worst-case scenario for the geopolitical interests of the Persian Gulf monarchies. They all become hostages of Iran. And who allowed this to happen? Donald Trump, who actually promised them protection. This will force them to invest huge amounts of money in building alternative logistics routes. Well, to the Red Sea, to the Mediterranean coast, through Iraq and Syria. But these are all pipelines. It's all money, and so on. Another conclusion, there has been a change of power in Iran. In fact, the transition has taken place. In the context of war and with the direct involvement of the US and Israel, who created the conditions for the takeover of power in Iran by the military and political wing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Islamic Republic has not collapsed, but it is now led by a collective, more pragmatic, yet at the same time, tougher leadership. But what's interesting here is that this strong religious bias has changed. That is, now the theocracy will step back a little. By the way, the fate, the scale of the IRGC. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps now has a real opportunity to hold on to power and start restructuring the system for itself, weakening on one hand the clergy and on the other hand the reformers oriented toward the West. So it will be something in between. Well, if you translate it into political language, they're kind of centrists. Not religious fanatics, but also not pro-Western reformers. That's a minus for Israel. They failed to disarm and defeat Hezbollah because they got bogged down in fighting in southern Lebanon. It's understandable they exclude Lebanese territory from the ceasefire to keep the option to eliminate Hezbollah during the pause with Iran. And if Hezbollah survives this war as well, and a ceasefire is established in Lebanon too, it will be a partial repeat of 2006 for them, when through guerrilla warfare they managed to prolong the fighting and forced Israel to retreat, thus strengthening their political position within Lebanon. Inside the United States, the war with Iran has led to further polarization between Democrats and Republicans, but it also dealt a serious blow to Trump's position within the Republican camp. The main, probably loser in this whole war is Donald Trump. Supporters of the war among the neoconservatives will now be targeted by opponents, and that's primarily Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, by the way. Vice President J.D. Vance gets a chance to strengthen his position as the main war skeptic in the style of "I told you so." Let me remind you, J.D. Vance quickly suggested we shouldn't join the war. If you noticed, he didn't really stand out during the whole war. He wasn't very visible, and only at the ceasefire stage did he suddenly join the negotiations. That's why basically he comes out a winner. And Trump lost part of his MAGA electorate and clashed with them because of Iran and Israel. Well, just Tucker Carlson's statements alone are worth a lot, and obviously all these results achieved so far could be revised, depending on what the conditions of the final peace will be, if it actually happens, of course. That's why we still don't know whether the sides have agreed to any mutual concessions or not. We still don't know after these 2 weeks. It's just a pause to resume the war. Or maybe it's really just a path toward, let's say, the technical formalization of peace agreements. That's why a lot will become clear on April 10, but the fact that the hot phase of the war is over is obvious. And further on, I think some escalations are possible, but definitely not a return to such large-scale bombardment. So, friends, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this video. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it. You can do this financially by donating through the QR code on your screen or by using the links in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.